Everybody, this is Glenn Woodworth with the Society for Education in Anesthesia, here with another one of our SEA webcasts on education innovations. And today it's my great pleasure to have Heidi Goldstein and Chris Goldstein here from the University of Florida to talk to us about their interesting project titled Fundamentals of AI for Anesthesiology Residents. Now, before anybody gets concerned, that's not a new AI robot to replace our anesthesiology residents, but it sounds like an interesting topic, and I'm glad to have them as our guests today. So welcome.
Thank you, Glenn. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, well, it's great to have you guys. All right, well, so I think to help us, get our feet on the ground, it'd be a great idea if you could just give us maybe just a slight overview of what your project was about.
Sure, Glenn. I'm going to get started. Slight overview is a very good primer because AI is such a vast field and we could go on for hours and hours. And that was actually the really important thing to us while we got involved in AI education, because it is such a vast field and such an intimidating field it's almost like a new specialty to possibly learn. We realized that a lot of people are talking about AI, publishing about AI, but there is not anybody who really teaches AI in the sense of giving residents fundamental, basic training of AI to get comfortable evaluating the literature with some of the definitions, even getting involved in projects, and more importantly, eventually being able to realize the limitations and risks and possibilities of AI in the operating room.
So if I understand this correctly, after taking your course, I would have sort of a fundamental background in AI that would allow me to better interpret the literature and maybe understand a little bit about what's going to be happening to us in the next few years. As I point out, the most recent article in anesthesiology, and I think it was in August, there were two lead articles in anesthesiology that were regarding applications of AI in the operating room. I think one was related to vasopressor use and another one was testing volume responsiveness or volume management. I might be wrong about that, but I do know that there were two AI articles there. And so it's going to help me, be prepared for what's going to be coming into the operating room. Would it be true to say that your course really wasn't designed to teach me AI so that I could go out and, start trying to develop an AI project? This is really more of a primer. Is that right?
That's pretty much it. Yeah. So actually, maybe it's a good time to go back a little bit to how all of this started. Basically, so Chris and I have always been a little bit of computer geeks and interested in science fiction. And of course, as anesthesiologists, as you know, we're always surrounded by the newest technology, by IT. And so we were excited to have the opportunity back in 2017 to attend a Future of Medicine conference where we met leaders in the field and had the opportunity to, and actually really, it was almost like a wake-up call that we realized AI in medicine isn't just science fiction anymore. It's not just about the future anymore. It's really in development and it's happening now. And so we foresaw the potential that this would have in our specialty, or in anesthesiology especially, and realized pretty quickly as we were looking into it that there aren't any courses for anesthesiologists out there that teach you the basics of this and that teach you, just general concepts that you were just talking about. And since we don't have any background in computer sciences, we had to teach ourselves this background information. And so at some point, because every day we work with residents in the OR, we just felt or realized it's our responsibility to pass on this knowledge and this background information as educators to the residents and help them not just get to the top of their field, but also to remain at the top of their field. So and that's kind of how we started.
Maybe a good, just kind of a touching off point might be, So somebody might be wondering, why do I need to take this course? I mean, I know there's AI out there. I know it's picking my Netflix choices for me. But why don't you throw out a couple of examples of where you think AI is coming down the pipe and is going to be in the operating room?
Yeah, there are so many examples, but one would be this one is a hypothetical one, but algorithmic-based preoperative evaluation and decision making. So there you can hypothesize, and there are examples of this, that an algorithm, just like it happens so much in lending and other fields, banking, how you get credit approved, there might be an algorithm that will preoperatively evaluate your candidacy for the operation, and might actually possibly, and this is a little bit the scary aspect, maybe even suggest to not have the operation based on certain risk factors, which brings the problem of what we also teach about, of AI is really only as good as the data. And if the data, for example, has bias and issues with, there are many issues that the data can have, but what you can get is really an algorithm that makes wrong decisions. So it is important, as these technologies come more and more to us in the operating room, to be aware that you don't blindly trust. It is what we like to compare it to, is almost like TEE and ultrasound. It used to be that only cardiac anesthesiologists and fellowship trained use TEE. But nowadays, it's almost standard for, I think, any residency program to incorporate basic TEE training into the residency, because it is expected when you have, even if you're not a cardiac anesthesiologist, that you can rescue a patient, maybe even better, with the help of a TEE, these basic TEE skills. And this is the same as true, as you mentioned in that article that just came out last month. Once we have closed loop mean arterial pressure titration, I think they use norepinephrine. As we all know, it's important to stay on top of the mean pressure. But the issue then is, again, the machine might make mistakes. And there is a terrible tragedy that we also talk about, when pilots were kept out of the loop with a certain safety system on a certain aircraft. And unfortunately, there were a couple of crashes that led to tragic loss of life. The pilots were perfect pilots. They had experience in flying an aircraft. What they didn't have experience in, the software that wanted to prevent the stalling of the aircraft, yet the aircraft just thought it was stalling and was trying to point the nose down, despite the fact that the aircraft in reality just had sensor input data that was not accurate, that led to crashes. But the pilots, at least some of them, could not overcome the force and the software and could not disable it. And we see that similar to complex closed loop systems that, again, might be coming down the pipe, that AI, and this is exactly what you also mentioned in the beginning, it can augment us in many ways. It can make us safer. It can make blood pressure titration way more. The article that you mentioned kept it very narrow in a very safe range. So it can keep us very much on target. But that also has the danger that if you do not exactly know, and I'm not saying just like using ultrasound, you don't need to exactly know the physics of ultrasound to use it okay, but you should know at least the basics. And the same is true for AI.
Yeah. Okay, well, you're going to make us a little bit more of an informed consumer, I guess. Well, tell me a little bit about what was going to be the structure of your course. How many lectures, whatever other types of educational interventions that we're using. What does your course look like? What does it consist of?
Yeah, so it's basically a work in progress, but and so because it's so fluent and ever changing, the technology is constantly moving on, and so of course it talks about, or we start out with some of the basics, such as what is AI, what is machine learning, what is ethics, and we talk about ethics and bias in AI. And
I think that's kind of
typically,
talking about the specific content in the course. I'm sort of
mhm.
looking for what would, is
Mhm.
it a series of lectures? Is it an online module? Is it a bunch of podcasts?
Yeah.
What's the overall structure of the course?
Yeah. So it's an extracurricular course, so it's certainly not part of the official curriculum. So residents had to sign up for it and give their free time. But what it is exactly what you mentioned, is a series of lectures. Some of them are online lectures from really big names in the field to get a good primer. And then some of us are from us
Mhm.
directed, and then we have group-based discussion, journal clubs. So it's a good mix. We have problem-based discussions, and what is typically the highlight, what I would consider the highlight, is we actually program, I shouldn't say program, we train AI. But as you mentioned before, our course is not geared towards, competing with years and years of computer science training. You shouldn't and you couldn't. But our course is geared towards giving you the basic knowledge, but also we talk about low code and no code platforms that allow us to train AI. And we have a project that is usually the highlight, that we can showcase after an academic year that we have achieved a training of AI in an OR setting that is relevant, that is doable. And that usually, yeah, as I mentioned, is the highlight, because usually people think you need to actually have coding skills, Python, and all the things that are mentioned when we talk about AI. But with these modern low code or no code platforms, can you get a group up to speed to have a project going um, that can serve as a proof of concept? That's what we
So
call it.
I think that's a great idea, because what it sounds to me like is that over the the full extent of the course, that you have this ongoing project where the end product at the end of your course, you will have actually produced something using one of these AI platforms. I think that interactive nature is a very, very good thing for course design, to keep people engaged, have an end product at the end, and yet to still teach concepts. Is this course offered? Oh, how many weeks does it take to go through the material?
Well, it goes on.
How many
Throughout
lectures
the
are there
year.
in it?
So we meet once a month,
Okay.
typically. We're currently, of course, this is now we just finished the inaugural course in June. This is now the second one. And we certainly have made some changes after evaluation and feedback from our residents. But we are currently meeting once a month with our residents and assigning certain little assignments, little projects in between, kind of as homework. Of course, extracurricular homework.
Okay. And is this a typical session? Is it about an hour, or how long does a session take?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's actually, the fun thing is it's about 45 minutes, but as usual, you start talking, you start brainstorming, you show the Q&A, so it ends up being longer than this. But the important thing is, as we mentioned, we're using also an app that allows us to share mini assignments, to do problem-based discussions, and work on the project, as you mentioned, throughout the course. But it's a one academic year-long course that at the end of the year, they proudly get a certificate on graduation, which again is something that that they can be proud of, because they had spent the extra time getting really familiar with something that is initially very intimidating and very, very, a very big task at hand.
No, it sounds like fun. I mean, I want to take your course. I like the way you give a certificate at the end. And you mentioned something important, which was an enabling technology that allowed you to do the course. And of course, I want to come back to that. But first, so over that, just again to give us an idea of structure, is that were you present at each one of these 1 hour sessions, one of the two of you, as sort of the host for the session? And were they conducted? And let's assume it was a non-COVID world. Do you think that they would be conducted in a non-COVID world as in-person sessions, or are they virtual? Okay.
So they were virtual, and currently, of course, with our current situation, they continue to be virtual still. But as soon as we can, we've already discussed this with the residents, we're hoping to be able to meet in person, because there's just no, I don't know, it's just much more personable if you do this face to face.
Okay, and so each session you might be, some of those sessions, it sounded like you might be watching a video or a video lecture of some other sort of, I call it a guest speaker, but otherwise it'd basically be, you're giving a traditional lecture, or you're leading a problem-based learning discussion, or maybe you're having some sort of, working on the project, so to speak. That's kind of the overall nature of the course?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, let's talk a little bit about the enabling technology that you mentioned. So what were you using as your platform? I guess essentially to host material, to do discussion groups, things like that. What were you using, and what was your experience with it?
So because of COVID, we had to use video conferencing software. So what we use obviously was either WebEx or Zoom, like normally is being used to have the interaction and the lecture, and going over the important definitions, and then starting discussions, especially important about bias and ethics and explainable AI and these important topics. When it came to assignments, we initially used a social media app that most people were familiar with. That's WhatsApp. What we ended up now changing, and this is again what you learn, and we used a pre-course and post-course survey to, as AI faculty, we should be data-driven. So to be as much data-driven as we could be, to get feedback and reorganize and restructure. So one of the things that we realized is, with WhatsApp, for example, or any social media app in that regard, it's very chronological, which also means you have to go back if somebody posts an article or an assignment. So this course, we changed that to an app that is called Discord, which allows us not only having a chat function, but a lounge area where people can actually voice chat and video chat, but more importantly, so have specific folders where we can put our assignments, articles, must reads, and make it really more comprehensive and a little bit more organized. So that was one of the important lessons learned from last year.
Was Discord something that I could log into when one of the sessions was not in progress, and I could look at old sessions, or I could access materials, or do offline discussions, question and answer, that kind of stuff, right? Correct?
Exactly. That's what we wanted to facilitate, that that someone can really ask a question or go back and revisit things. That's way easier with this app in particular. There are other apps. It's, I think, under the umbrella of LMS, learning management systems. There are a variety. We even thought about Canvas, because some schools and universities use that, but we ended up choosing Discord based on some residents' feedback and recommendations.
Okay, great, fantastic. Obviously that's one of the purposes of these kinds of sessions that we're putting on, is to help people understand, what are those enabling technologies that help them to really deliver the kinds of educational sessions that they want to. So the first year you didn't use it, you're just starting to use it for this academic year? Mm-hmm. Okay. What other types of feedback did you get from the participants that caused you to maybe change any parts of the structure of the course?
The number one request was really so first of all, we had very inspiring comments that really just motivated us to keep going and to continue this course. And actually, we even had a recent graduate who is now in private practice, who has joined us for the follow-up course for this next session, because he says he wants to continue learning about AI and still furthering his knowledge. But to get back to your question, the number one request was really or doing more of the upfront lectures, rather than having our residents look at videos and then maybe talking about it afterwards. So that was the number one request.
I want to make sure I understand that, because there's some literature around this, and I'm curious about it. So you're saying your residents preferred sort of traditional lecture, with the course interaction, because it's a small group, than they did to watch the video beforehand,
Mhm.
sort of, gosh, I'm blanking on the term, and here I am, an educator, the reverse classroom, right? Where they could watch it, and then we're just going to spend our time discussing it. They didn't like that.
Yes, we were surprised as well. But I guess it turns out if you were, some of them had a little bit of harder time managing their time and actually ended up cramming that video watching session in shortly before we were to meet, or sometimes didn't make it at all.
Okay.
And I think that was the main
And
the main
and I
driver.
think it's also, at least in our local area, it's really how we teach. It actually went against our successful way of teaching, having these pre-recorded lectures and then talking about it and trying to follow up. The most successful teaching we have experienced and actually gotten feedback on is really if we have a particular problem, and that problem-based learning to kind of try to figure out a solution like we are doing now in almost a fireside chat or a very interactive group. And I think what contributed to that really, Glenn, was that this topic AI can be so dry with data science concepts and other definitions that if you're just watching pre-recorded lectures and then trying to come back to it and revisit it, I think it benefits more from truly, like you mentioned, we have this new study or this new publication. How is that relevant? What is new about it? What is AI about it? What is machine learning? How could this be a benefit, a risk? So you get more out of it, I think, for everybody when you have really more in real life examples, I should say, and that's probably for this topic in particular.
And if I
Okay,
could add
that's just an interesting piece of feedback to get about, and I suspect it's what you hit the nail on the head was, it's the time issue, is that our residents are
Mhm.
quite busy, and to do anything outside of the classroom, like watching a lecture where you got to have to spend, the 45 minutes to watch it, is a big chunk of time to them. They want micro learning that they can do in 15 minutes. So many of them actually watch videos at high speed, or
Yes.
listen to the podcast in double time so that they can
2x.
listen to Mickey Mouse give all of their lectures. But I think it's because they're overwhelmed with the amount of things that they have to do in the limited amount of time that they have. So that's an interesting
Oh,
comment.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, as educators, again, the purpose of these podcasts and webcasts is to try to help everybody learn. You structured this as a pre and a post survey. Is that how you got your feedback? I mean, of course, you got feedback from residents in the course, but you did a survey.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
All
That
right.
was actually important to us, that we had an anonymous way as well,
Oh, yeah.
like Glenn, as you know, because there's one that you get a in-person feedback, of course, but the anonymous survey was important to us to get as much objective data that we could also present to our chair and program director and see if we made a difference and if we're headed in the right direction. So that was important to us.
Did you find anything out in the anonymous survey at the end that you really had not heard up until that point?
So what we really, or what really kept us going and drove us on, was that in the pre-survey, when one of the questions we had asked was the residents to rate their confidence in achieving AI skills that would help their future career. Not a single resident felt confident before starting the course. After the course, all of the respondents, or all of the participants that responded, felt either moderately confident or completely confident.
Interesting.
So we
Right.
thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, that's fantastic. How many participants did you generally have?
We had 18.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, quite a bit. All right. And they were all anesthesiology residents,
Yes.
because obviously this would be applicable to everybody in medicine. And in fact, I don't know, depending on the level that you were presenting things, outside of anesthesiology, outside of medicine, even to, a college student, high school student. All right, so that brings me about, sort of future directions. Because one thing is about leveraging what you're doing. Would it not work if you posted this and I'm on the West Coast and I wanted to be a course participant and I could be in on these. They're probably happening at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, my time, but is that something that's possible or not?
I could see us doing that in the future, right? Initially, we wanted to keep it in a smaller group, just to be honest, because this was the inaugural course and we were, yeah, not just spearheading it, but we weren't quite sure how it would pan out. And hence that original pre and post survey. But certainly that's something I think could definitely be discussed and done in the future.
Well, one of the
And
things that we
some of
always
it has been.
one of the things that we always ask in these interviews is, one of our purposes is to be able to disseminate so people can, hey, you're doing something awesome at the University of Florida. How can I do that here at, Indiana University or, some other university? How can I do that here? And so, one option would be to make that course more available, but then on the other hand, you might be overwhelmed with the number of participants that sign up. The downside of actually replicating this at different institutions would be finding qualified faculty that would be willing to conduct this course over over a year period. And would we be able to find qualified faculty to do it? Or can you provide a toolkit that would help, maybe they have to go through your course, the faculty member 1 year, and then could they become faculty members to then, do this at our own institute? How do you guys see us taking advantage of the great work you've done? How can other programs take advantage of this?
I think you're again spot on, Glenn, with your experience. We thought about obviously the anesthesia toolbox as a great modality. To be honest, we don't feel confident at this point because we just finished the inaugural course. We are still tweaking. But as you mentioned, you're looking already in the future. Since this is so cutting edge, what we eventually are likely going to do is once we have found what we would consider good for the community, that we feel good about, the quality, then we probably would possibly work on sharing the curriculum and sharing it in a toolbox format that this should be able to be replicated.
Yes.
Now,
I want to point out
interestingly,
just one thing before you say that is, I'm not representing the toolbox here. What I'm really saying though is we ask, many of the other participants that have been on these SCA webcasts to provide supplemental material, like for example, their curriculum, and other things, if it's in a form that they feel like they're ready to share. So I'm of course not asking you to do that, because again, what we try to do is, help everyone do the great thing that you're doing. So maybe, we should have you come back next year and we would basically publish that along with your webcast. We would, put the curriculum, here's the suggested reading list, here's the exact structure, here's all the PBLDs, everything that you would need to do to do this course if you had 2 informed faculty or if you had an informed faculty member that wanted to do it. But I'm suggesting to you, it may be difficult to find faculty members that would you consider, or I'm asking you to consider thinking about how you could set up a course to train faculty to do this at other institutions if it requires a faculty member to do it.
yeah, that's actually another such an important point you brought up, because coincidentally at UF, we just got a major funding from a major chip manufacturer that I'm not going to mention here, but they donated the most powerful supercomputer in terms of AI in any higher education facility in the US. So this is a big hub. And interestingly enough, we have so many qualified AI faculty, and some of them are inspiring. They have published really a lot, but they are so busy with their actual AI work and grants, they don't really have time. They're getting overwhelmed, as you mentioned, with emails, that it's really tough to find somebody who is already experienced to have the time for teaching, because that often is almost like a stepchild, unfortunately. on the other hand, bringing somebody up to speed would require exactly what you mentioned, that that person participates in the course, gets up to speed, that they feel comfortable then taking a leadership role. But that's very much doable. I think that's actually probably the most feasible way.
Another suggestion would be for you to reach out to the SCA to one of their upcoming meetings about running a workshop. It would just be a teaser, because you really couldn't teach enough in a workshop to allow me to go off and become a faculty member. I suspect that this is going to be a little more heavy duty than that. But it might be an interesting teaser, and I don't know if it would make a good workshop or not, but I think that's something that you might consider, and that's exactly the kind of things that we try to promote at the SCA, is that workshops to teach other teachers. That's what this is about, is
That's a great
to teach other
idea,
teachers.
Glenn. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Now, I did want to say, Chris and I, like we were saying earlier, we don't have a background in computer sciences either. So we're all self-taught ourselves. I think that's just one of the things. Sometimes you just have to jump over your own shadow, or maybe overcome this imposter syndrome, or thinking that you're not good enough or you don't know enough. I think if somebody is really interested and really motivated in learning about this, they can certainly probably, or I don't see why they shouldn't also be able to.
Well, I think that's a general comment. I think for our junior faculty is to feel like they can step into the unknown and try to learn something, and and like this topic that you said that you didn't have specialized background. I'll have to say ultrasound came out long after I finished anesthesia training back in the 80s. And so, yeah, it was I had to learn it from the ground up, just like everyone else. So, we can do it. So that's the thing about encouraging junior faculty. If you think of something, you can do it. Here's a great success story. But I would say that I think a very useful thing that you could do if you want to help your brethren is to try to think about how to put together a faculty course. Because as you pointed out, we don't have to be experts. We just have to know enough to be able to conduct the course and introduce these preliminary concepts to make our residents, our trainees, aware of this kind of stuff.
There's another important component that is important to us as faculty, is by teaching for residents to become more in the loop with AI, we need to set up the next generation of physician leaders at some point. There will be some of them that are at the table when it comes to ethical discussion, policy making, because we eventually have to get there. So if you're not at the table, you might be on the menu. So the point is really, even if you are not after being deeply interested in this, after a year worth of a course, you have enough of a knowledge that you might need to get involved. You might be sitting on an ethics board, and even if you go in private practice, let's say, and you're not even interested in academia, but you might be that person in that group that has the most experience about AI when it comes to it, and then represent the group in such matters. So we are really encouraging physician leadership here also in terms of policy making, whether it's on a local, regional, or national level.
Right, I think that's great. I want to circle back again to think about, again, one of the purposes of the webcast is to help junior faculty develop courses. Maybe it's not going to be in your topic, but they've got some sort of idea. So I always like to ask, were there any barriers? What was the biggest hurdle for you to be able to put this together? And then what kind of departmental support you had in any way? Time, money, cheerleading, whatever it was, So tell us about those things. So what kind of barriers do you think it was, and how did you overcome them?
The major barrier is like we mentioned, we circle back to that as well, is there was nothing comparable that we actually felt we could build on. That's why it took us so long. And that's why I think your idea is so great now, that it took us pretty much 3 years of figuring out how could this work, what courses. Now we have now distilled this, and we can probably, when we are ready in the next year or so, we can probably teach this almost in a workshop or in a more compressed way. As we have struggled through this, we already have weeded things out. So the biggest barrier was really teaching ourselves initially.
We had to invent the wheel.
Yeah.
Teaching yourself the topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then the biggest cheerleading was also then, as it often is, so of course the support of the chair and the program director, but the biggest driver and inspiration were our residents themselves. You know that yourself as educator, once they're like sponges and they're interested and you can see that, then you can work with that, and then you just keep running. And
Right.
so the biggest driver then in the end were the interesting residents.
Oh, yeah.
So let's say I wanted to put on a new course on tiddlywinks, you know, and I wanted to teach the residents how to do tiddlywinks. You know, what do I need in terms of resources? What was my ask for my chair? What do I need?
Well, since this is about AI, and again, we didn't have to ask about anything other than permission that we would be able to have this extracurricular course with their blessing. And of course, the permission also was about their academic progress. If anybody was at risk, that obviously their residency progress took precedence, which was not an issue at all. But
Okay.
other than that, truly we basically did this on our own time. But what I would recommend is obviously a discussion to when you spearhead this about non-clinical time, because it takes time. So the discussion to formalize it will be, is there first an interest? Do I have the capability and confidence of putting on that course, coming up with a course outline, presenting it in a structured way? That's what we did to our program director. This is the goal. These are the goals. This is the roadmap. And then asking for non-clinical time, protected time, that you can really focus on this, especially if you're creating lectures by yourself for your own material, that you're not relying on other material.
Here comes the key question then, you know, as we as faculty members that are under the gun, you know, every day, did you get any non-clinical time from your chair? And what kind of, how many days are we talking here?
So we function differently. I mean, this is about also imposter syndrome. What we always, from our perspective, wanted to make sure that we have a successful product. So we did this in the first year, the last year, basically on our own time. So no, we did not get protected
I was just going to
time.
say, Chris is being very political.
No,
politically correct.
no, I think I personally didn't feel comfortable asking for protected non-clinical time for something that was not a success or a proof of concept. So we now have this. We have gotten great national and actually international responses also to the manuscripts we published and the work we did. And so now, yes, we're asking for non-clinical time because it's starting to, it's actually, we ask for a lab, that we can have a lab space where we can expand some of the work. Again, now we are talking about IRBs with hypotension prediction index monitors that are already commercially available. So it's.
But of course, Glenn, this is really, we've come so far in this from 2 or 3 years ago to where we are now. It's been amazing.
But I think the message to junior faculty is yours is not an uncommon path. Is that you often have to spend your own nights and weekends on developing a product of, you know, whatever this thing is, because other people can't really touch it and see it when you're trying to explain the idea. You have to get it so far to a point where then your chair is going to give you some of the resources that you might need to get the project to the next level. Very similar to grant process that junior faculty often have to get a very, very tiny grant of something $5,000–$10,000 or something like that to do a pilot project and get data that they can then use to justify a grant application to a larger granting agency. So that's great. Well, thanks very much. What I would like to ask you to do is, if you could please reach back out to me after this and send me, if you can, even just a list of what your lectures were, or topics that you covered in each of your, you know, about 12 sessions. Maybe, you know, links to your publications or anything else. So, you know, things that we can put along with the the webcast for other people that are interested, and then maybe some of us select faculty you'll invite to come listen in on your course.
No, happy to do that, of course, Glenn.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Sounds like a great project. You put a lot of effort into it. Yeah, it sounds like a great project, and wish you the best success in the future. You're covering an important area of learning for our trainees and for our faculty. So.
No, Glenn, compliments back to you. You gave us, actually, I wrote down some important things like the workshop, the faculty course, the trainer, so to speak, these types of things, very important. So thank you for your leadership in this. That actually is important mentoring that we consider also. So we'll definitely stay in touch also regarding impossible SCA workshops. So we really appreciate the opportunity and your experience in guiding us further.
Well, that's the purpose of the SCA, is, that's really what we're after. So that's fantastic. Well, thanks a lot, guys. It was great to meet you. Good luck on your project.
Thanks, friend.
All right. Bye-bye.